My name's Jonathan Rich. I'm 41 years old, grew up here in Atlanta. I sell real estate, develop real estate, and found out about Purpose on Tap just from a few of the guys that have been coming here for a while. Yeah, I mean, from a very early age, I accepted the Lord when I was 8 years old. Grew up in a Christian home, had some pretty amazing grandparents that poured into my life when I was younger. And I mean, for me, it was always there. Faith, a knowledge of who Christ was from a very early age, and then, you know, just over the years, transformation, discipleship, you know, one step in front of the other, trying to understand and know who the Holy Spirit is. I'm going to just kind of share my story and how I got to where I'm at, both as a father and in my career and as a husband. There's actually two things that I really want to try to communicate to you guys tonight. One is that failure actually a lot of times is a catalyst for success and purpose and impact. And so to pay attention to those moments. And then the second thing is who you are is infinitely more important than who you're trying to become. And so we'll kind of dig into that and see where it goes. How are you guys? Good. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I think in a second, I got some handy dandy slides I worked up for you guys this afternoon. So we're gonna hook those up. I'll tell you a little bit about myself while he's getting ready. 41 years old, grew up here in Atlanta for the most part. My parents moved here when I was 5. Grew up in Tucker, Georgia. Went to Henderson High School, which became a middle school when I was in 10th grade. So then I went to Lakeside High School, graduated from there in '99. I have 7 kids. And I want to share with you guys tonight primarily my journey of work and career, which has had many facets from the point I was a young kid until graduating college, through my 20s, and then get into real estate, which I entered in my 30s, and kind of talk about purpose and how I found it kind of through those phases of life. So, we got the slides up yet? Working on it. I'm gonna start all the way back when I was 10 years old. How many of you guys grew up in Atlanta or Metro Atlanta area? Anybody ever heard of Rehoboth Baptist Church? North Lake Mall area? So if you guys grew up on the west side of town, you don't know it, but on the northeast side, there was this church that back in the day was a mega church before there were mega churches. Rehoboth Baptist was like 100 acres of property, 17 baseball fields, a basketball gymnasium that was, similar to Georgia Tech's arena. Their sanctuary had like 2,000 people. They had the church basketball league when I was growing up. And so when I was 10 years old, when I was 9 years old, I started playing basketball there. And we got those slides? They coming? It's gonna be really good, guys, when it gets there. So when I was 10 years old, I started playing basketball, and I was like, all of my buddies had started when they were 5, 6, for whatever reason my parents were lazy. I didn't start till I was 10, and I was pretty good. And so I had like the Horace Grant sports goggles, and I was the high scorer on my team. And this was kind of the first moment in my life that I can remember being like thinking about career and work. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna play basketball when I grow up, right? This is the era of this is 30 years ago. This is the era of Magic versus Bird. Michael Jordan was up and coming, one of my favorite players at the time. I'm like, I'm gonna do that, right? Having no idea what it really took to become a basketball player. And I was pretty good. I went on to play in high school. I could have played in college. I chose a different path than playing, because for college, for me, I was 6'1", so it's like if I was gonna really play at the next level, it was gonna be point guard. I probably wasn't fast enough. And so I had to make a decision. Do I play JUCO basketball and maybe play, maybe ride the bench, maybe get a scholarship, maybe not, but I'm gonna give my life to that for 4 years? Or do I play music, which was the next thing that I thought about in terms of career? And so when I was 16, I was still thinking basketball, but for my birthday, my mom bought me a guitar, and I started playing guitar. And I taught myself to play. I had a Mel Bay chord book. If any of you guys play guitar, you know who Mel Bay is. And I taught myself to play, and then I had a little CD, like Sony CD player, and I would play like my favorite records, and I would learn by listening to the records. I'd play 5 seconds, pause it, try to figure out what notes they were, reverse it, play those notes, play the next 5 seconds. I did that for years. So 16, 17, started playing guitar, got pretty good. About a year and a half later, I played like, when I first started playing, it was like 8 hours a day. and then it was 6 hours a day, and then it was 4 hours a day. So by the time like 18 months in, I was pretty good. Started a rock and roll band when I was 17 in my high school. It was really funny because I was like the Christian kid in my high school, and there were not a ton of Christians at Lakeside High School in the late 90s. So I was a nerd. Like, I was on the very, 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 very bottom of the popularity totem pole up until my senior year when I started playing rock and roll music. And it was like overnight, all of a sudden it was like every award you could win, every like yearbook thing you could be in, I was there, not because anything changed with me. It was just like I was playing a guitar on stage and girls thought that was cool. I don't know. So anyway, so rock and roll, I took that into college. My mom was pretty smart and she was like, yo, you can't do this for a living right now because it makes no money. And so you need to go to school and you need to figure out like a backup career. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do if I can't play music? What am I going to do in my life? And I was like, well, like, I like hanging out with kids. I'm pretty good with kids. I had a friend who was a teacher, or a family friend who was a teacher in Nashville, and I'd seen her one summer, and she was like, man, we really, really, really need dudes in our elementary schools because all of our kids don't have dads. So I'm like 18. This is a summer before I go to college. I'm like, I mean, I could do that. Elementary education seems like a pretty easy degree to get. So I went to Truman College, and then I transferred to University of Georgia, and I got a degree in elementary education while I'm playing rock and roll music. So there's a brief stint there of like, I'm gonna teach, did the student teaching thing. I never actually taught as a profession, but that was what my degree was in, and I thought I was going to do that. Graduated college, still playing rock and roll music. It actually starts to become a career, not one that you could raise a family on or actually pay rent even, but I was making some money, got a couple of record deals in my early 20s, was traveling around the country, had a record deal in Japan, never went there, but sold some records in Japan, and then I'm making, literally not enough money to pay rent. I'm traveling the country, I'm doing that, I'm making music. Back then, it was a little bit before the digital music transition was happening. So this is like the early 2000s. iTunes was starting to come around. Napster was already a thing, and it kind of made it harder to make money selling music. So everybody in the record industry was trying to figure that out. There's just not a lot of money to be had unless you were touring 1,000 people a night type of rooms. So I'm struggling to pay rent. So I'm like, all right, I got to do some other stuff. A guy called me. He's like, hey man, we're starting a church in downtown Atlanta in an old nightclub. We need a guy who will be our pastor of the arts. And which is a really trendy way of saying, can you come lead worship for us in 2004. So I went and met with the guy. He seemed like a good dude. And so I spent the next 10 years of my life from 22 to 32 playing music, traveling the country, working as the pastor of the arts at a church plant called 1027 Church, which is on Peachtree and 10th, right across from the Federal Reserve Building. I learned a tremendous amount during that time. Really, honestly, about business. Being a part of a church plant is very, very entrepreneurial. It sucks in many, many ways. It's very hard. Every Monday morning you look in the mirror and you're like, why am I doing this? But the Lord was very gracious to me during that time and taught me a lot just about life and leadership and a lot about many of the things that I've worked into my real estate career around geocentricity, which is a term that I use for building very, very deep community in a close proximity to where you physically occupy space. My pastor of that church, we are a Southern Baptist church plant, which take it or leave it, we could talk about for a long time after this if you get a few more beers. But one thing that Baptists do really well is they are like demographic like wizards. And so there's these people that somewhere live in a closet behind a computer and they can spit out demographics for anything. And so as we were planning our church, we had all these resources of like, this population of people live in this 3 square miles, and if you're trying to reach these people, they'll be 32 years old with curly hair and 6 kids. And so that data was coming in. It was like, this is how you grow a church. And what we were learning in town in 2003, this was for those of you guys that were around or anywhere inside the perimeter in the late 90s and early 2000s, like it wasn't cool yet again. Like urban revival hadn't happened. People were still leaving the city in the late 90s, especially in the faith community. And what we were discovering during that time was that geographics matters definitively more than demographics do. And so, and what that meant for us is like, it doesn't matter what the demographics are that you're trying to build inside of this church or business or whatever else. What matters is who your next door neighbors are. Like, get to know them, build a relationship with them, and that's how you can grow your thing. And so from that, in my 20s, playing music, playing church, doing the church planning thing, I met a guy who was moving down from Michigan to plant a church. He hung out with us at 1027 for about a year, and the first person he met, he moved to this neighborhood called Kirkwood, and I'd never heard of it. We were living in Virginia Highlands at the time, and the first person he met in the church that he was gonna plant in Kirkwood was a guy who'd been flipping houses for about 10 years in that neighborhood and was pretty successful at it. And we were all in the church planting community that I was in. Keep in mind, I'm still playing music, not making money at that. Making very little money as the pastor of the arts. And we were all looking for bivocational opportunities for two reasons. One, just nobody was making very much money, and in town was starting to get more expensive to live. But number two, we felt like it was a great way to be in the community, building relationships. And then if you could create a bivocational opportunity, it would pull financial burden off of the church that you're trying to get off the ground, right? So I meet this guy, comes from Michigan. He's like, hey man, I got this guy, he's flipping houses. He'll teach us how to do it. You and I should flip a house together. And so my introduction to real estate, my wife and I were just renting an $800 a month apartment all the way until this point in my life was when it was 2007, so I would have been roughly 28, 27, 28, somewhere in that range. Todd Briggs from Michigan and I, we bought a house at 2550 Hosea Williams Drive in Eastlake, and we decided to renovate it. And we lovingly called that house the flip that flopped. And I'll explain that in a minute. But we bought it in June 2007, and we tried to start selling it after a ton of pain and anguish, having no clue what we were doing, not getting help from his friend who was the house flipper in any way, shape, or form, except for him. I remember, like it was yesterday, he came to the house one day, we're like 2/3 of the way through. We realized that the attic master suite addition that we had done was crap, and we're trying to fix it. And he comes over and he's like, just bump a couple of dormers out here, no big deal. And we're like, well, don't you have to permit that? And he's like, it's fine, just do it. Like that, he wasn't helpful is the point that I'm trying to get to in any way. And so then we put it on the market in March 2008. And if any of you guys remember that time in American real estate history, it wasn't the right time to be listing your first flip, right? And at that point, it was just a thing. Like I wasn't thinking about real estate as a career. I wasn't even really thinking about, at this point, real estate as making a ton of money. I was just like, this is cool and fun. I'm doing it with Todd from Michigan. And if it makes a little bit of extra money and it creates a new skill and opportunity, cool. But instead it turned into, oh crap. I have every penny that my wife of, I think 14 months at that point, and I own in this house, which is about $10,000 plus the $30,000 that I borrowed from my parents. Todd from Michigan's got a $5,000 credit card that's maxed out from our materials, and we can't sell this house. In addition, the hard money lender that we borrowed the money from to do the renovation, they're losing mortgage after mortgage after mortgage. Every day that goes by, they're losing another, they're defaulting. They're having another borrower default because the sky is literally falling. So we were past our 6 month, we had a 6 month term with 2 3-month extensions, supposedly. We're 2 months into our first extension and they put a guy on me. And he's like every day. He's not coming to break my arms yet, but every day he's calling. Hey man, what's going on? Have you listed it? Hey man, what are you doing? What's happening? Hey man, are you refinancing? What's going on? And we're listed. We started at, I think we had, I don't even remember the numbers completely, so these will be kind of pulling out of the air. But let's say we were in it for $225,000 and we were hoping that we were going to sell it for $300. When we started, we listed it at $285. Then a month later, $265. Then $250. Then $240. We're coming up on what we thought was going to be our second extension at 9 months. And the guy's like, you're not getting a second extension. And you need to get out of this house now. And so there was really, and by the grace of the Lord in that moment in my life, because I was so naive and so inexperienced and had no business being in that position as a 28-year-old, my wife was a nurse and we were living in an $800 apartment. And so we were able to qualify for an owner-occupant loan, and we had to move into the flip that flop. So at 28 years old, I was literally living in, occupying the greatest failure of my life up to that point. And with my wife and our 6-month-old. And so there's two things that I wanted to kind of leave you guys with in terms of points of my story tonight. One of them is be who you are instead of trying to become who you want to be. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Be who you are instead of trying to become who you think you're wanting, instead of trying to become the person you want to be. We're in imitation culture. Most of us probably spend some time every day. If it's not on social media, it's on the television or somewhere else seeking out a fantastical idea of what it would be like to live in someone else's shoes, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. And the Lord is telling all of us, like, hey man, just be who you are. You belong already. I specifically equipped you with your own story and your own skills and your own set of ways that you're going to impact and bring joy and life to this world. So that's one thing. The second thing that applies to the flip that flopped is, and this was a really, really important lesson that I didn't know I was learning in June of 2008 when I moved my family into that house at 2550 Hosea Williams Drive. We also had to, I don't know where I got the money from at this point. I think my parents gave me more money, but we had to pay Todd from Michigan $5,000 just to kind of get him. We didn't have an official LLC or nothing. We did everything wrong. So it was just like a handshake agreement. I was like, yo, bro, I'm moving into it. Here's your $5,000. You get out debt free. So Todd's out. Todd from Michigan's out. My family's living in the failure. And what the lesson that I was learning that I didn't realize is that sometimes our greatest failures are actually forming the foundation for purpose and even greater success. And so the house at 2550 Hosea Williams Drive for me was my introduction into real estate. And I didn't know it at the time, but so that was 2008, we moved in. 2009, I just this is before Zillow. I'm in Eastlake now. We were in Virginia Highlands. We were planning our church there. We were doing the geocentric model, be close to your neighbors, and we got ripped out of it by force. We're still working at 1027, but we're in this completely different neighborhood, even though it's 4 miles away. It's if you know in-town neighborhoods, it's 7 neighborhoods away, which might as well be the difference between Soho and Chinatown in New York City. It's completely different culture, completely different feel, completely different type of houses and architecture. And so I'm like learning this whole thing for the first time while living in the flip that flopped. But somehow, like, I just started to fall in love with that new culture, with the people, with the history of Eastlake, and specifically, Eastlake has a very unique history in this town, especially around civil rights, also around the things that happened with the Eastlake Golf Course. So I started to dive into that history. I started to fall in love with the neighborhood. Then I find myself on this realtor's website who gives you free access to the FMLS system, because there was no Zillow. So like the only way that you could get real estate information was to kind of backdoor, some other guy's site. So I'm doing that, and every day I'm just on it. Like, this is commonplace now. People do this all the time, like, Zillow junkies. You're not actually buying houses or anything, but you just love looking. So I was doing that, and in 2009, I ended up referring $35,000 of commission to the agent who didn't sell the flip that flopped. He was a guy, really nice guy from Woodstock, had no idea what was going on in town. I don't know how. I think Todd from Michigan knew him. That's how he became our agent. And I just had all these friends who were first-time home buyers, because those are the only people that could buy houses in 2009. And I'm like helping them figure out, like, this is the neighborhood you should be in. This house is a good deal. This house isn't. And then I hand them off to the guy from Woodstock. He comes in, he writes a contract, and he makes a commission. And I'll never forget, Christmas 2009, he sent me a Christmas card, and he was like, thanks for all the referrals. And I was like, that's it? Like, you just made $35,000. I get a thanks for all the referrals, like a Christmas card from Hallmark. So I was like, maybe I should get my license. So I'm still playing music. I'm still at 1027 Church in Midtown. I got this newly acquired skill that I don't know what to do with in renovating houses. Not well, but I at least knew why when you flip a light switch, the light comes on. I understood some things like that I didn't know before. And so I was just like, man, all my buddies, I could have made some extra money last year if I had my real estate license. Why don't I get my real estate license? So 2010, got my real estate license, and that was the beginning of my real estate journey. So I'm still playing music and thinking that music is going to be a career for me. I had, again, like some level of viability, but I was never, my best year in music, I may have made $30,000, maybe. If you didn't include, the one thing that I left out was I also was, along with 1027, I was working at Church of the Apostles at the time doing music and some creative direction for kind of all of their student ministries. So high school all the way through singles ministry. And so if you didn't include like that income, the most money I ever made on my own personal rock and roll music was maybe $30,000. But I still thought it was going to be a career. So I'm like, real estate's just a thing I could do on the side. So 2010, I got my license. It's the very bottom of the Great Recession. If you look at every chart, like first and second quarter of 2010 is kind of like the bottom of the valley. But I just did whatever I could do to try to make some business happen. I had no clue what I was doing, and I sold 3 deals that year. I made $10,000. I paid for basically getting my license and the website that I built. And then the next year, I just started going to like, just hustling. Like anybody, are any of you guys entrepreneurs on your own business? Anybody in here? A few people? Okay, so you guys know this. When you start your own business, you're just hustling, you're trying to figure it out. And that's what I was doing in 2010, 11. Any for sale by owner sign that I saw in my neighborhood, I'd stop and knock on the door, tell them I'd sell it for 1%. Any construction dumpsters I saw, which were very few in 2011. I think I live in 30317, which is Edgewood, Kirkwood, Eastlake. I think in January 2011, there were 2 dumpsters in the entire zip code. So there was not a lot of construction going on yet. But I'd go meet the builder or renovator or whoever, investor, whoever it was, or I'd leave them a note and I'd say, hey, I'll sell your house for 1% and I'll cut your grass. And I actually had this one listing that I got on Memorial Drive right next to Eastlake Park, which is adjacent to Eastlake Golf Course, if you guys have ever been there. And it was a crap renovation. It was the worst. Some really corrupt dudes from South Carolina who had no idea what they were doing. They took a bunch of money out of their hard money loan, so they did a real crap renovation and then pocketed the money from the loan. Then they're trying to oversell it. I spent a year on it. I spent $1,000 of my own money making the curb appeal better with some shutters and some flowers. I cut the grass every week for a year. We finally got an offer after a year, and it was short like $8,000. So my seller was so bad that he didn't even know what he owed. So it was short $8,000, and he was like, I'm just not going to sell it. I'll let it go to default after all that. And it was short $8,000 because he took $50,000 off the top of his loan. It was the craziest thing. Anyways, so I'm hustling. That's the point. I'm hustling. And in 2011, I sell $2.7 million. So including one house that my wife and I bought for ourselves, we rented the flip that flopped, recovered from that, and we moved into a foreclosure that we bought in Kirkwood. And so including that sale, which was like $300, I sold $2.7 million. And I learned a ton. And a couple of for sale by owner people let me sell their house. I learned a ton from them. And I realized that I'm coming from rock and roll, marketing, self-promotion. I'm not a real estate guy. I still am not a real estate guy, if you notice. And that goes to the first point that I wanted to talk to you guys about, which is be who you are versus who you think you want to become. When I started in this business, literally everyone was like, to be successful, you got to drive a Range Rover, wear a suit, and have hair that swoops like this. And I just was like, you may be that dude, and that's awesome. I'm not, but I'm not that guy. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to try to figure it out a different way. And so I built a website that was very different than any other real estate website that had been built in Atlanta up to that point. Built it on a blog format. I didn't have an FMLS search on my website. I just started telling stories about the houses I was selling. 2011, I renovated another house. It actually went really well. We sold it before we were finished. I made $110,000 on it. I told the before and after story of that. I was linking my blog to Facebook at the time. Facebook starts sharing it, and that goes crazy. And I just started building a following of people. Some were local, some were not. Some were out of state, whatever. But everybody was sharing kind of the stories that I was telling about my neighborhood, the history of Atlanta, the work that we were doing. 2012, I sold $11 million. So I tripled 2011. And at that point, it was kind of like real estate, my real estate life is going like this. I'm still leading worship at church or whatever. That's just kind of like a constant. And it was kind of just becoming like this is part of just who my family is in our faith community, right? It was less of a job, more of like we're just kind of here. Real estate's going like this, and music is going like this. And at some point in 2012, it's like they crossed, right? And I was like, oh, I gotta figure this out. Like, I think real estate is a legit career. Never planned it, never was like, this is what I'm gonna do. Even as it was happening, I was like, I was working really hard. I mean, by 2012, I was working 80-hour weeks that evolved into 100-hour weeks by 2013. But I was loving the work. And so it just felt, and I found kind of like a creative niche within it. I wasn't just putting clients in cars and helping them write contracts, although the relational angle of that I did love. I got into the renovation space and the creative space of taking things that were broken and restoring them and making them new, building the community of Eastlake. I started storytelling, working on narrative-based marketing within my business. And so I found all these creative angles to where I was like, none of this is work for me, even though I'm working extremely hard. And so I had to come to grips with like, oh, music might not be a thing for me in terms of a career. But this real estate thing, which I never planned, but will require a lot of new skills for me, especially on the business side of leadership and owning your own business and all the nuts and bolts of all the stuff that I have no idea about, like accounting and spreadsheets and budgets. It probably is a real thing. And so I somewhere in 2012, I was like, all right, if this is a real thing, we're gonna commit. We started renovating some more houses. We got to a place that we were renovating 3 houses at a time while I'm selling real estate. Went from 11 to 18 million, 18 million to 32 million. And at that point, around 2015, I'm working 100 hours a week. And I'm like, all right, I have to hire someone or I have to say no to about 40% of what we're doing. So my wife and I, we're having this conversation for about 6 months. I really didn't want to hire anybody. I was scared to death of building a team and being a boss because I just didn't have any context for it. I had no, I look back now and I realize like in church planting, in all the rock and roll bands I was in, like I was entrepreneurial in all of those things and I was leading in all of those things, but I just didn't see myself as a boss. And so it wasn't a financial decision. There was no financial incentive. Both were equal options to us as a family in terms of the finances, whether we say no to 40% of what I was having the opportunity to do or whether we hire and scale. And so after a long time and a bunch of counsel, we did decide to hire. So I made my first hire in 2015. And then the next, I guess we're 2022 now, the next 7 years were a complete blitz and whirl. We have 12 people on our team now. I have 6 agents that are part of my team. I'm also a part owner in the brokerage that I'm a part of, which is a little boutique brokerage called Keller Knapp Realty that has 170 agents. So I have 6 that work for me along with 4 full-time staff members. Last year we sold $92 million worth of real estate. I also do a bunch of infill construction development work. So all across in town, mainly on the east side, we do a bunch of single family infill construction, restoration, renovation work. The renovations that my wife and I were doing, it got to a point that it was really hard for me to separate Jonathan Rich, the real estate agent, Jonathan Rich, the developer, builder, renovator, and it just got confusing for a myriad of reasons, and it was a lot of work for me to represent, even though I was hiring general contractors for me to represent the renovations we were doing as the owner/developer. So I started a custom home building company called Pop Custom Homes, and that's been going for 7 years. Most recently, we've gotten into we're doing a ton of space, a ton of work in the kind of like small multifamily space. So if you think about like old school garden apartments, quadruplexes, 12-unit buildings, things like that, we're developing some of those new where they're allowed to be built. And so because of the need of the development we've done there, we've also started a property management company. And so that's where we're at now in 2022 is I'm doing real estate. I don't see myself as like a real estate or a business guy, even though that's where I've invested a lot of time and energy the last 10 years. For me, real estate is a vehicle to be in the business of the city of Atlanta, which I love and I think has incredible potential to be one of the greatest cities on the planet, especially given our history as a center of the civil rights movement and a model for the beloved community, and then in the business of community and really helping people, all the clients and neighbors and friends that we interact with, understand that the space, the physical space that they occupy, more specifically the space that they occupy and live inside of, is a catalyst for them to build incredible community within their family and in the neighborhood that they choose to live in. And so So that's what we're doing. That's who I am. That's my story. I'm sorry the slides didn't work. I had a really good picture of the Horace Grant goggles. So if you want to see it, it's on my computer, and we can flip it up later. And yeah, I'm excited to engage with you guys and answer any questions you got and get to know y'all. Yes, sir, in the back with the hand raised. What is the biggest struggle the past few years? And I would say my oldest is 14. He just started his freshman year in high school. So I'm going to say the past at least decade. That I've had as a husband and a father. What was there, how did you frame the question? Just in context of career and everything else. Yeah, so, and I would anticipate you're leading to like work-life balance and the idea of like, how do you do both well? I was talking to one of my really good friends who happens to also be one of our financial advisors yesterday on the phone, and he was saying, one of the craziest things, he had just done some speaker session for a bunch of CEOs, and he was like, one of the craziest things about life for guys who are trying to find purpose and really like make an impact and be amazing dads and husbands is that the period of life that requires the most from you, for most people, the period of life that requires the most from you in your career is also the period of life that requires the most from you in your family. Especially when you're thinking about like physical time and ability. Because, the first half of time that your kids are in your house is when it's the most physically demanding, right? At some point, it's funny, I'm in both right now, which is absolute hell, and I would not recommend it. But like at some point, it switches from physical to emotional demands as a parent, right? Doesn't make it easier or different. It's just like much less physical demand, much more emotional demand. I'm in that with my oldest for sure, starting to get into it with my 11-year-old. The first thing I'll say is that it's hard, and without intention, and a supportive spouse, it may not be possible. So in some ways, like I have a ton of thoughts on this, and I don't want to waste all of our time. I'd love to talk more about it afterwards with anybody. 2012 to 2015, that's when my real estate business went from $3 million a year in sales to 50. I was working literally 100-hour weeks. So my schedule was typically wake up I'm not an early riser, so like wake up at 7-ish, help our kids kind of get their things together, start work at 8:30, work till 5, maybe 6, depending on appointments, come home, dinner, do whatever with the kids, 9 o'clock, go back to work 9 to 2, go to sleep, do it again the next day. And I was doing everything. I was taking my own pictures, I was putting signs in the yard, I was building my website, I was doing everything, the normal things that agents do in terms of getting business, holding business, helping people buy houses. I was doing everything. And so I was working these 100-hour weeks. And my wife was behind me 100% for those 3 years. And we had constant conversations where it was like, yo, I get what's happening, right? Like she understood it. Like I get what's happening right now, and we're building this together, and you're not gonna do it forever, right? So we had a mutual understanding. And if I had not had that, I would not be doing real estate right now. I never did curse the Lord. My defense mechanism is probably more like just be totally silent. And so and this goes back to what I was just talking about with like support a spouse being a huge part of balance and trying to figure out how to have purpose in your family. My second or third year in, so somewhere around 2013, we flipped a house, and then I sold it to a client who was a 50-year-old single woman. So I was the seller, I was the investor developer, and I was the agent. And I was the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So a little thing called dual agency. If you guys know anything about real estate, really bad idea, insane amounts of liability, you should never do it. But I didn't know the difference. This lady and I had built a good relationship. I had I thought a decent amount of kind of like equitable relational trust with her, and I never thought twice about the liability of this. Well, she moved in, and it was just a little bungalow that we renovated. We didn't even do an addition. So we just, kitchens and bathrooms, new electrical, new plumbing, roof, etc. So she moves in, and about a year later, the basement floods, the crawl space floods. And she calls me, and she's freaking out, and mold, and she's allergic, and how could we do this to her? And not how can we do this, but and then her boyfriend, who was an attorney, like he got involved and was like, they never like directly threatened litigation, but it was like, it was there. And I'm not making money yet. I'm very new. I'm still not even sure it's my career path. And I didn't know what was gonna happen. In addition, the contractor that I had at the time never closed out the permit for that house. So we pulled a permit, but he never closed it. And it was a general renovation. I don't wanna get into the specifics of it, but it's like, he should have definitely closed it, but it's not like we built a new construction house or did an addition. It was kind of this kind of in-between thing. But I'm like, well, there's liability there. There's liability that I was a dual agent. There's liability that I referred the inspector to her that didn't tell her that it might flood at some point. The flooding had nothing to do with us. We didn't change anything in the crawl space. It was just built into a hill, and it's a 1920s home. They all flood when it rains a ton. But I spent 3 months like being non-responsive in every way. Being non-responsive to my wife. We had family come in town, non-responsive to them, non-responsive to my 9-month-old son. And so one day my wife pulls me in the kitchen, and she's like, hey man, what the hell is up? Like, what are you doing? Why are you being like this? Why can't you engage? Where have you been? And she knew 2/3 of what was going on, but she didn't know all of it. And so I laid it out to her. I was like, I'm real scared. I don't know what's gonna happen here. Because I was working through a solution, but I didn't know where it was gonna go. I'm afraid I'm gonna get sued. I don't know what that means. And she said to me, she was like, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the absolute worst thing that could happen? And I didn't say anything. And she was like, we get sued, we lose everything, so what? She's like, I'll be here, Josiah will be here, we'll be healthy, what else do you need? And that was like a moment for me where it's like, oh, this incredible failure on so many levels. I never got sued. I paid 20 grand to put waterproofing in for her that I really didn't have to, but worked out. She sold the house 3 years later. She made a ton of money. But like, that was Callie saying to me like, hey, like, it's gonna be okay. Even if you don't think it's okay, even if the worst outcome happens, it's gonna be okay. And so I have a trillion stories like that one, but that one was very specific where it was like, your failure actually is helpful to remind you of what your purpose is. The question is, how has my faith changed, or at least kind of like my relationship with the church or with faith, now that I'm not employed by the church? I mean, so I love history. I'm a student of church history. I grew up in kind of like whatever there is, and forgive me if you think I'm an idiot for saying this, but whatever healthy parts of the Southern Baptist Church there is, like I grew up in that. I have 2 uncles who are Southern Baptist pastors, a granddad who is a lot of the reason that I am who I am as a Southern Baptist pastor. Like I grew up in that world. And then even though I was never full-time in vocational ministry, I did work for 2 churches, a small church plant in an urban environment and one of the largest, most wealthiest churches in Atlanta. And I saw behind the curtain of both of those. But all the while doing it as a creative who also had I'm playing bars on the weekend. Like my parents set me down when I was 20 and was like, you shouldn't play in bars because people drink there. And I was like, what are you talking about? But they thought like if I was gonna be a good Christian artist, it meant that I would be playing in churches or at Christian music festivals or whatever else. And that was just never me. I was always kind of in these other places that I felt like I could build real relationships and hang out with people that were different than me. So I say all that to say, my relationship's changed a lot, but some of it is actually because of, I think, just where we're at as a culture and not with my difference between being on staff at a church and being in the professional world. I was talking with some of the guys on the board earlier. I have a very, in my mind, like clear conviction on what the royal priesthood looks like. And to me, there shouldn't actually be a lot of definitive difference between someone who's a vocational minister on staff at a church and someone who's a doctor or a lawyer or a business owner or a teacher or a garbage man. I think the call of Christ and the demands that come with it are the same. It just so happens that for those people who are missionaries and or vocational ministers, like the majority of their, like the work that they put their hands on is in relational development and discipleship, right? We should still be all doing that. Like I'm doing that in my work with my 8 people on my team and the 170 agents at Keller Knapp and our clients and everything else. It might not be as intimate or as long-term of a trajectory relationally as a pastor, but it's the same work. It's just in a different context. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it has changed, but I think it's changing a lot more because we're living in a really unique cultural moment where all of the institution of what we all grew up to know the church as is kind of being stripped away. And we're getting to see, like, I think we're just getting to see the church for what it should be, hopefully, as we move forward in culture. So that's like, I think I'm shifting a lot in that ways in terms of my relationship with church. But beyond that, like, the actual like difference between who I was as a vocational minister or having a job on staff at a church and who I am as a real estate agent, the work isn't that much different, just the vehicle is. If I could, I don't think you guys will be able to see this, but I literally was just doing this before I got in here. So the question was, he said, I'm very passionate about zoning and the transforming of Atlanta. More specifically, I'm extremely passionate about accessible, attainable, and equitable growth in our city and really in the country as a whole. We have a tremendous affordability problem. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with that. It's not just poor people that can't afford housing anymore. It's pretty much almost, if you're in an urban environment, in the top 25 cities in the country, it's anyone that makes less than $100,000 a year no longer can afford secure housing, which is defined as you have a place to rent or own that doesn't cost you more than 30% of your income to occupy. We're losing it like crazy. And so I spent a lot of my time in my work making no money, but building kind of an educational platform around this concept that we need. A lot of the problems we have, especially in the supply of housing, go back to very antiquated zoning laws. So this is another whole talk. I'd be happy to talk to you for hours about it, but I'm very passionate about how single-family exclusionary zoning laws are a cancer to us as a country and really to the world as a whole. But I'm also in a business that sells $3 million infill single-family homes. And so the question is, how do you balance those two things? I was just looking at my own Instagram stories from today. Let's see if I can show this to you guys. It's not up. Okay, so I posted this today. I don't know if you guys can see it very well, but coming soon in Virginia Highlands. This is an infill construction project that I'll be listing next month. It's going to be listed for $2.69 million. It's 5,000 square foot. It's 3 blocks from Virginia Highlands. This is a ridiculous house, right? The post right before it, which just expired, but I put up yesterday, was an article from the New York Times that came out yesterday. There's a huge study that just came out, which is fascinating, where some scientists did some social analysis and were able to prove that when rich people and poor people are in relationship with each other, poverty decreases. So basically, they were able to prove scientifically that when rich people and poor people are in proximity and relationship to each other, that the people who are poor actually start to financially raise themselves out of poverty. And this is a theory that we've been touting for a long time in this work that we've been doing around attainable housing, that we live in the United States, for how amazing this country is and for all that it has done historically and globally and everything else, the way that we have arranged ourselves in the spaces that we live in is destructive as it could possibly be, because what we've done is, by design, we've said you should only be in a relationship with people that look the exact same way that you do, that make the same exact amount of money that you do, that are the same age as you, and that like the same stuff that you like. And I would say with conviction that biblically that is the antithesis of the gospel and what God intended for community to be. And so it's fascinating that now we have some data that is actually suggesting one of these things, which we've been saying for a long time. If rich people and poor people live next to each other in the same community, they actually will both benefit. That will be a flourishing. That is one of the definitions of a flourishing community, is when you can be multi-formed versus monolithic, multi-ethnic, multi-age, multi-socioeconomic versus monolithic. And the way that we built this country the last 100 years, post kind of agriculture, like in post-industrial revolution, the way that we built this country is by design to be monolithic in the way that we build community. So how do I balance that? I'm trying the best I can. Like if you don't know who I am and you don't know the work that we're doing and you look on my Instagram, you think I'm a big old hypocrite. And there's not a whole lot that I can do about that. I can spend a lot of time explaining why we do the work we do in the residential real estate space and in single family. Because if we didn't do it, somebody else would. And we're trying to bring as much integrity as we can into that space. But yeah, I mean, I'm occupying both, and it's a very, very delicate balance, for sure. 100% the fear of the failure versus the failure itself. Once you get in it and you understand it, it's the fear of the unknown, really, I think is what you're alluding at. The fear of not knowing what the end result will be is infinitely worse than the end result. Even if the end result sinks you, I would say. So yeah, the flip that flopped, once we move into it, once my wife knew, once everybody knew, once Todd from Michigan had his $5,000, once my parents knew that they weren't getting their 30 back for a very long time, once everybody knew, and once I knew, and once the guy from Bluefields Capital that was calling me every day wasn't gonna break my arms, I was like, dude, Eastlake's pretty cool. I like this place, right? So, and I could go through, there's 3 or 4 other moments in my career that have the weight that the flip that flopped had. And I think every single one, if I walked through them, would be like, oh yeah, it was the fear of the unknown. I'm actually in one right now where it's like, it's a problem that's really hard to figure out. I'm not liable, but I kind of am, just because of who I was in the transaction. And it's not just like, if it was just like, pay some money and get it fixed, it'd already be done, but it's not that simple. And so I'm just sitting with it. And I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And my wife is in my ear being like, who cares? Who cares what happens? It'll be fine. But I'm still sitting with it, you know? So yeah, 100%. Great question. We're good. Thank you guys.